Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about H.G. Wells's novel, The War of the Worlds. There's an angle. You can actually read it. So this is one of the great classic sci-fi novels by one of the greatest sci-fi writers to ever pick up the pen. This is a very genre-defining alien invasion story. We start out with this series of strange events. These explosions are witnessed on Mars by people in observatories around the world. Then something crashes in a field outside Woking, which is outside of London in the UK. People show up, they sort of investigate it, and then things start going sideways, right? So this is a cylinder that has fallen to Earth from Mars, and what people don't initially know is that it is full of Martians, and they have some tech. We get a description of the Martians. We get a couple of different places where we get descriptions of the Martians in this novel. And they're sort of Lovecraftian. They're basically gigantic brains with tentacles, right? So if you think back to the old 1980s TV version of Ninja Turtles, there was, what's his name? Fucking the guy from a different dimension. Who was he was just a brain with tentacles. That's straight out of H.G. Wells here. I will put a picture of him up with the name. I will look it up after this because I can't remember it off the top of my head. Anyway, it's not important. And so basically what happens is there's these sort of initial confrontations. The Martians are significantly more technologically advanced than humanity. This is the humanity of 1898. And basically, initial phases, humanity gets its ass kicked, right? London is just devastated. All these towns in the home counties, the area around London, is absolutely destroyed. Mass panic. People are fleeing to other parts of the country. They're trying to flee to the European continent. Everything is just wrecked. There's actually this one bit that I find really, really striking. Because it is, and Wells's narrator, who is a philosophical writer, doesn't necessarily know this at the time that he's reflecting on this. But he's talking about the Martian attacks on London and the surrounding area, and how they were very strategic about it, right? They would attack train lines, they would attack telegraph wires, anything that allowed for transportation, communication, or any sort of organization. What he says is, they were hamstringing mankind. London. Now, London was probably the most important city on the planet in 1898. I will accept that claim. But the idea that, because they were taking out London, they were taking out humanity, that's a big claim. That's a very Victorian English claim. And Wells was a Victorian Englishman, so, I guess there you go. But basically, we follow this narrator, this philosophical writer. He didn't witness the first crash, but he went down and saw the cylinder. He was one of the first people to see it. He saw the Martians when they emerged. He survived all of these really, really close encounters with Martian fighting machines, etc., etc. And he makes the claim at one point that he has probably seen more of the Martians than any other surviving person, and that seems like a fair claim. We also get a few chapters that are really focused on his brother and his brother's experience in fleeing out of London and these sort of massive panicked crowds and things like this. And then we get these really sort of devastating, horrific scenes of just mass death. The Martians have a heat ray that they use to just burn things and people. They have this black smoke. Wells is basically anticipating the gas warfare that would come to be one of the great terrors of World War I about 16 years after this book is written. So the Martians use poison gas attacks to just kill large numbers of people. And they especially do this, they will just like fill wooded areas with this poison gas because humans had set up artillery. The British military had set up big guns, cannon, in sort of wooded groves, with the intention being they would wait till a Martian fighting machine got close, and then they would attempt to destroy it at close range. So the Martians basically just said, well, we're not going to get that close to anything until we've sprayed this poison through it. So they're very, very sophisticated in how they go about attacking Earth. And we get these devastating scenes in which these large numbers of people are described dying. We get a lengthy period where the narrator is trapped in this sort of half-buried house with another character, a curate who's increasingly sort of becoming unhinged, and the Martians are right outside. Another cylinder has landed right outside this house. That's why it's half buried, is because of the collision when that cylinder landed. And it's a devastating, brutal scene of their sort of starvation, their terror, their fighting amongst one another between the narrator and this curate, until eventually the curate just loses it altogether, and the narrator has to sort of bash him in the head, and then a Martian comes and finds him and drags him off. So what actually saves the day for Earth? Do the humans rally and win a great victory? No. If it were up to people, this is Mars 2.0. So what actually happens? We get this sort of scene toward the end where the narrator is he's wandering through devastated, empty London. Really, the only things around are corpses. And he sees a Martian fighting machine just standing, just still. He had heard some sort of unearthly howling for a good long while, and he couldn't figure out what it was. Then finally, he sees this Martian fighting machine, and he has this sort of suicidal moment of despair where he's like, fuck it, I'm going to just go up to it. If they kill me, they kill me. At least I won't have to deal with this shit anymore. And what he sees, scattered about it, some in their he sees a bunch of Martian machines. Some in their overturned war machines, some in the now rigid handling machines, and a dozen of them stark and silent and laid in a row were the Martians dead, slain by the putrefaction and disease bacteria against which their systems were unprepared. Germs. This, again, is a really, really advanced idea that Wells is working with. I mean, germ theory was relatively new in 1898. People like Wells, who were very scientifically literate, would be aware of it. But, I mean, for a long, long time, people had no idea that germs existed. Some people had a vague idea or a theory about it, but they had no real positive proof. I mean, if you go back even 200 years earlier, 150 years earlier, people thought disease was caused by things like bad smells or an imbalance of the humors. So Wells is very much sort of cutting edge science for 1898. And one of the things about this is, again, it sort of anticipates something that would not be a reality or would not be a systematic reality until much, much later, which is germ warfare, the idea of using disease to combat an enemy. In this case, it isn't actually germ warfare because humans haven't sort of said, hey, disease, go get these Martians. Wells is also pulling from what we know happens when you have a population that does not have immunity to particular diseases that have those diseases introduced to them. You get mass death, typically. Um, that's what happened to massive proportions of the indigenous American population when Europeans arrived, because Europeans brought diseases, bacteria that indigenous Americans had no immunity to. And so, by some estimates, as much as 70% of the overall population of the Americas was wiped out, and one major contributing factor was disease. So Wells is very, very advanced here, as he always is. Wells was a very, very capable and intelligent scientific writer. So I want to read you a couple of bits where he actually describes the Martians themselves. Krang! Kang? Kang or Krang, I think, is the character from Ninja Turtles. I will look it up. I will put it there. But I want to give you a couple of descriptions of the Martians, just so you can start getting a sense of this. And again, this is very sort of Lovecraftian. There's something very sort of uncanny and horrific about this. So this is the early description that we get, the first time that the narrator sees a Martian climbing out of the cylinder early in the novel. A big, grayish rounded bulk, the size perhaps of a bear, was rising slowly and painfully out of the cylinder. As it bulged up and caught the light, it glistened like wet leather. Two large, dark-colored eyes were regarding me steadfastly. It was rounded and had, one might say, a face. There was a mouth under the eyes, the lipless brim of which quivered and panted and dropped saliva. The body heaved and pulsated convulsively. A lank, tentacular appendage gripped the edge of the cylinder, another swayed in the air. Those who have never seen a living Martian can scarcely imagine the strange horror of its appearance. The peculiar V-shaped mouth with its pointed upper lip, the absence of brow ridges, the absence of a chin beneath the wedge-like lower lip, the incessant quivering of the mouth, the Gorgon group of tentacles, the tumultuous breathing of the lungs in a strange atmosphere, the evident heaviness and painfulness of movement due to the greater gravitational energy of the Earth, above all, the extraordinary intensity of the immense eyes, culminated in an effect akin to nausea. There was something fungoid in the oily brown skin, something in the clumsy deliberation of their tedious movements, unspeakably terrible. Even at this first encounter, this first glimpse, I was overcome with disgust and dread. So I'm not going to read you the other longer description, but we get a better description of the Martians later on. And yeah, they are very much... They are sort of giant greys, right? The stereotypical alien species, the gray, is basically a gray's head with some tentacles rather than a body, but very large. So that's what we're dealing with here. There's also descriptions of some of the Martian machinery, particularly their fighting machines, which are these giant tripod sort of things with a... Wells calls it a cowl. It's basically a sort of command chamber that holds a Martian who drives it and mans the heat ray, and they can use them to capture people because they, rather than eating, they inject the blood of other beings directly into their veins. So they need a steady supply of creatures to feed off of in that way. So stuff like this. But there's other stuff here that I find really, really interesting. And I want to talk about some of this. So first, I'll mention this. I maybe should have started with this. I think this has an amazing opening paragraph. It has one of the great first paragraphs in all of literature. So I want to read that to you. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that human affairs were being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own. That as men busied themselves about their affairs, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacency, men went to and fro over this globe about their little affairs, serene in their assurance of their empire over matter. It is possible that the infusoria under the microscope do the same. No one gave a thought to the older worlds of space as sources of human danger, or thought of them only to dismiss the idea of life upon them as impossible or improbable. It is curious to recall some of the mental habits of those departed days. At most, terrestrial men fancied there might be other men upon Mars, perhaps inferior to themselves and ready to welcome a missionary enterprise. Yet across the gulf of space, minds that are to our minds as ours are to those of the beasts that perish, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes, and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. And early in the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. I think it's a great opening paragraph. Really, really strong. So much tension built up. But there's also there's this sort of great reflective quality alongside these sort of philosophical questions about human self-confidence and our sort of sense of superiority. Alongside this, we get a number of sort of interesting elements in the first couple of pages. One is there's an assumption of parallel development that I think is maybe questionable, because Wells asserts that Mars is an older planet than the Earth. I don't know whether that's true or not. I don't know astronomy, I guess, would be what the discipline that's concerned with the ages of various planets and stuff. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So he starts from the assumption that Mars is older, and therefore any civilization that developed on Mars would have developed earlier than our own civilization and would be considerably more advanced. Again, that assumes parallel development on a similar planetary time frame, and that may or may not be a reasonable assumption. Anyway, it works out in this novel because the Martians are more advanced than we are, but there you go. Another thing that I think is really, really interesting, it is and maybe I think this from the perspective of the 2020s, where we are sort of on the verge of environmental catastrophe, if not in the early phases of environmental catastrophe. But the thing that drives the Martians to invade is changing environmental conditions. Their planet is cooling. They can it's no longer easy to sustain themselves on their planet. And so they want to move to the Earth and colonize the Earth because the temperature is much more hospitable to them. There's other issues that aren't. I mean, gravity is heavier on Earth than Mars, and so they have trouble moving. But there's more. I think Wells has argon in the atmosphere, and that gives them a sort of a physical boost, whatever it is. But the thing that I think is most interesting, maybe, about this is Wells's turn toward relativism. Um, Wells is one of those writers who, while imagining these scenarios that were completely unlike anything you would actually find in the real world, was also extremely good at tying them back to things in the real world. So, talking about the Martians, he says, and before we judge them too harshly, we must remember what ruthless and utter destruction our own species has wrought, not only upon animals such as the vanished bison and the dodo, but upon its own inferior races. Hashtag 1898 racism. Fucking, yeah, not good. The Tasmanians, in spite of their human likeness, were entirely swept out of existence in a war of extermination waged by European immigrants in the space of 50 years. Are we such apostles of mercy as to complain if the Martians warred in the same spirit? First off, the Tasmanians, they weren't like humans, they were humans. That was a group of human beings who were indigenous to Tasmania. So, yeah, we got a little bit of stuff there that's not ideal. Again, it's 1898. He's English, British Empire. This is really the height of the British Empire. But this idea of, like, hey, we're fucking terrible as a species. We as human beings are incredibly destructive. We wipe out other civilizations. We wipe out other species. Wells didn't live into the era of factory farming, but factory farming today is horrific, right? But we do it as a species. We do it on large scale. And Wells is sort of saying, yeah, what the Martians did was bad, but in their place, we would do exactly the same thing, and we have. That sort of relativism, that ability to sort of turn inward and say, hey, maybe we're fucking awful, is one of the things that makes Wells, I think, such an amazingly good science fiction writer.